People like you should know your place, behind the glass, not in front of it." The curator's words sliced through the crowded exhibition hall, sharp as diamond edges. The elderly woman's weathered hands froze mid-air, inches from the display case containing the Emperor's Tear, a 70-carat diamond she had once pulled from the earth with those same calloused fingers. The silence that followed was suffocating. Security guards shifted uncomfortably. Wealthy patrons pretended not to notice. That's when Dwayne, "The Rock" Johnson, stepped away from his private tour group. The Treasures of the Earth exhibition was the most exclusive jewelry showcase in Manhattan this season, invitation only, with tickets costing more than most people's monthly rent. Under crystal chandeliers and perfect lighting, diamonds worth millions sparkled in bulletproof cases. Margaret Khumalo, 72, had traveled from South Africa just for this moment, wearing her best dress, faded blue, mended at the sleeve. 30 years in the mines had bent her spine, but not her determination to see what became of the stones that had cost her youth, her health, and countless friends. The curator, Gregory Waverly, stood with practiced authority in his tailored Italian suit, flanked by security. "Perhaps you've mistaken this for a public museum. This is a private collection for serious investors and collectors." Laughter rippled through a nearby group of socialites. Margaret's eyes remained fixed on the diamond, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. From across the room, Dwayne Johnson's expression hardened. The same hands that had conquered wrestling rings and action movie sets now gripped a champagne flute with increasing pressure. This wasn't part of any script, but the scene was already in motion. Margaret stood perfectly still, her work-worn hands now clasped tightly at her waist. The journey from Kimberly to New York had cost her every penny of her meager savings, 3 decades of putting aside a few rand here and there. Her granddaughter had helped her navigate the visa application, the flights, the overwhelming maze of Manhattan, all for this moment, to see the Emperor's Tear diamond she had personally unearthed on August 16, 1990, a date etched into her memory like the scars etched across her palms. She remembered the weight of it in her palm, cool and rough before the cutting, before the polishing, before it was taken away on the supervisor's velvet tray. That same diamond now sat on black velvet, transformed into a teardrop pendant worth more money than everyone in her mining camp would earn in 10 lifetimes combined. "I just wanted to tell it hello," she whispered, her accent thick, but her English precise. "I carried it first, you see." Gregory Waverly, exhibition director with 3 art degrees and connections to 4 royal families, regarded her with the same expression one might use when finding a cockroach in a 5-star restaurant. "Security," he said, not even bothering to raise his voice. "Please escort this person to the exit." The crowd around them had expanded, drawn by the spectacle. Diamond-draped women whispered behind manicured fingers. Men in suits worth more than cars pretended fascination with nearby displays while stealing glances at the unfolding drama. Someone snickered. Someone else took a discreet photo with a smartphone. "I have my ticket," Margaret said, dignity unwavering, as she reached into her handbag to produce the printed confirmation she'd carefully protected in a plastic sleeve. "My granddaughter bought it for my birthday. I am permitted to be here." The security guards, 2 broad-shouldered men in black suits with earpieces, hesitated, looking to Waverly for confirmation. The curator's smile didn't reach his eyes as he examined the ticket with theatrical scrutiny. "This appears to be for the general exhibition tomorrow. Tonight is for VIP patrons only. Collectors, investors, specialists. People who appreciate these pieces for their value." He handed the ticket back with 2 fingers, as if touching something contaminated. "A simple misunderstanding. Perhaps you can return tomorrow with the general public." It was a lie, and several people present knew it. All tickets for the exhibition were the same, The VIP preview was merely a fiction Waverly had created on the spot. A woman in pearls the size of grapes lowered her eyes, uncomfortable with the deception, but unwilling to challenge it. Dwayne Johnson had been observing the situation unfold while maintaining a conversation with the exhibition's major donor, a tech billionaire whose passion for rare gems had funded the entire showcase. At 6'5" and with shoulders that strained the seams of his custom charcoal suit, Johnson was impossible to miss, even in a room filled with notable figures. Yet he had a talent for blending in when he chose to, for observing without being observed. "Excuse me for a moment, James," he said to the billionaire, his voice carrying the same warmth and confidence that had made him a beloved figure both in wrestling rings and on movie screens worldwide. The tech mogul nodded, curious but respectful of whatever had caught Johnson's attention. The Rock moved through the crowd with surprising grace for a man of his size, a skill honed through years of physical performance. People instinctively stepped aside, some doing double takes as they recognized him, others simply responding to his sheer presence. The distance between himself and the unfolding confrontation closed rapidly. Margaret was now reaching back into her bag, pulling out a faded photograph. "I have this," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "This is me, the day we found it. I thought—" She stopped as a shadow fell across her, as the crowd around her shifted and parted. Dwayne Johnson now stood beside her, a mountain in human form, radiating calm authority. "Is there a problem here?" Johnson asked, his voice measured and calm, yet carrying an unmistakable undercurrent of authority. The effect was immediate. The curator straightened his posture, security guards shifted uncomfortably, and several onlookers reflexively reached for their phones, though none dared to openly film the interaction yet. Gregory Waverly recovered quickly, professional smile sliding back into place. "Not at all, Mr. Johnson. Just a minor misunderstanding about admission credentials. We're handling it discreetly." "I see." The Rock turned to Margaret, his expression softening. "Ma'am, I couldn't help overhearing. You mentioned something about this diamond?" He gestured toward the Emperor's Tear, catching the light in its facets like captured stars. Margaret looked up at the towering figure beside her, momentarily startled by his sheer physical presence before recognition dawned in her eyes. Her granddaughter had movie posters of this man on her bedroom wall. She clutched the photograph tighter. "I found it," she said simply. "August 16th, 1990, Kimberly Mine, 3rd level down. I was the one who pulled it from the earth." A murmur rippled through the surrounding crowd. Johnson extended his hand respectfully. "May I see your photo?" With careful movements, Margaret handed over the faded, slightly bent photograph, protected in a plastic sleeve similar to the one holding her ticket. It showed a younger version of herself, standing with a group of dust-covered workers, all wearing hard hats and headlamps. At the center of the frame was a rough, uncut stone held in a gloved hand. Johnson studied the image, then looked at the diamond in the display case, then back to the woman before him. The connection was unmistakable. This wasn't some confused elderly woman seeking attention. This was a direct link to the precious artifact's origin, standing unrecognized and unwelcome in a room full of people who claimed to value the very thing she had helped create. "Mr. Waverly," Johnson said, turning back to the curator, "I believe we have an honored guest among us." The curator's expression tightened, a barely perceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth, betraying his frustration. "While that's a fascinating anecdote, Mr. Johnson, this exhibition focuses on the artistry of the cutting, the setting, the transformation of raw materials into exquisite pieces. We can't possibly verify the claims of everyone who might have handled these stones at some point in their journey." A woman in an emerald evening gown, a Brazilian supermodel whose face graced magazine covers worldwide, stepped closer, examining the photograph still in Johnson's hand. But isn't that journey part of what makes these pieces special? Their history? Waverley's smile became strained. Of course, the provenance of each piece is meticulously documented in our catalog, available for purchase at the gift shop. Johnson handed the photograph back to Margaret with gentle care. "I'd like to hear her story," he said, the statement simple, but carrying the weight of a command. His eyes swept the gathering crowd, connecting with individuals. "I think we all would." The tech billionaire Johnson had been speaking with earlier moved forward. "Absolutely. These stones have human stories behind them. That's what makes them more than just pretty rocks." He extended his hand to Margaret, James Cartwright. "I helped fund this exhibition because I believe gemstones connect us to both history and the earth itself." Margaret took his hand with quiet dignity. Margaret Khumalo, 32 years in the mines. A subtle shift had occurred in the room's atmosphere. What had begun as an uncomfortable confrontation was transforming into something different, a moment of unlikely connection across vast social divides. Several guests had moved closer, genuinely curious. Others remained aloof but were watching nonetheless. Gregory Waverley recognized he was losing control of the situation. "This is highly irregular. We have a schedule to maintain, a program of expert presentations." "I think we've just found our most qualified expert," Johnson interrupted, his charismatic smile firmly in place, but his eyes communicating that this wasn't a suggestion. Realizing he was outmatched, Waverley attempted to salvage his authority with a compromise. "Perhaps we could arrange for Ms. Khumalo to visit during regular hours tomorrow, when we have more time for additional perspectives." "Or," Johnson countered, his tone still amiable, but brooking no argument, "we could take 5 minutes right now to honor the hands that made all of this possible." He gestured toward Margaret. After all, these gems didn't just appear in these cases by magic. The crowd had grown larger. Phones were now openly recording the exchange, live streaming to platforms where followers of the wealthy and famous were already beginning to comment on the unexpected drama unfolding at the exclusive exhibition. The security guards exchanged glances, uncertain whose orders they should follow. Margaret stood straighter, drawing strength from the unexpected alliance. "I won't take much time. I just wanted to see it once, the finished thing, to touch the case at least, if not the stone itself." The Brazilian supermodel spoke again, addressing Waverley directly. "I wore a 10-carat diamond to the Met Gala last year, and all I know about it is which designer provided it. I'd love to know more about where it actually came from, who found it, whose hands brought it into the world." Others murmured agreement. Even among the elite gathered in that room, there was something compelling about this connection to the true origin of the treasures they admired through glass. Waverley recognized defeat when he saw it. His job was ultimately to please the VIPs, and it was becoming clear which outcome would satisfy them. With practiced grace, he shifted strategies entirely. "Well," he said, smiling, as if this had been his intention all along, "perhaps we can make an exception to our usual protocol. Ms. Khumalo, would you do us the honor of saying a few words about your experience with the Emperor's Tear?" The carefully constructed social barriers of the exhibition had been breached. Now the only question was what would flow through that opening. Margaret stepped forward to the display case, Dwayne Johnson at her side like a guardian mountain. The spotlight designed to make the Emperor's Tear diamond sparkle now illuminated them both, the elderly miner and the Hollywood star, an unlikely pair united against the invisible barriers of class and privilege. "The day we found this stone," Margaret began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke, "there were 17 of us working in that section. It had been a difficult month. The tunnel had flooded twice, and 3 men had been injured when a support beam cracked." Her calloused finger hovered above the glass, tracing the diamond's outline without touching it. Saipho had pneumonia but couldn't afford to miss work. Thabo's daughter had just been born the night before. Johannes was teaching his son to play football on Sundays. These names, unfamiliar to everyone in the room, fell from her lips with reverence. They weren't just co-workers, they were family forged in darkness and danger. When my pick hit something different, something that rang wrong against the stone around it, we all stopped. You learn to recognize that sound. Her eyes were distant now, seeing not the gleaming exhibition hall, but the dust and close heat of the mine. I cleared the rock away with my fingers, careful, so careful, and there it was, catching the light from our headlamps. She looked up at the transformed stone, now precision cut and worth millions. We cheered, we hugged, we thanked God, not because we would be rich, we knew better than that, but because a find like this meant the mine would stay open. It meant we would keep our jobs for another year. It meant our children could eat. Johnson watched her face, his own expression reflecting a profound respect. Around them, the crowd had fallen completely silent, many guests suddenly uncomfortable with the weight of the jewelry adorning their own bodies. When I held it, Margaret continued, it was warm from the earth, rough. It didn't sparkle like this, but it was beautiful in a different way. She paused, her gaze steady on the diamond. We took turns holding it before the supervisor came. A ritual, you could say, for luck, for blessing. Each person who touched it whispered their hopes to it. A woman nearby unconsciously touched the diamond bracelet on her wrist, as if hearing its origin story for the first time. What did you whisper to it? The question came from a young girl, perhaps 12, standing with her parents, collectors whose family fortune spanned generations. Margaret smiled, the lines around her eyes deepening. I asked it to remember us, to carry a piece of us wherever it went. Dwayne Johnson placed a gentle hand on Margaret's shoulder, then turned to address the crowd. His voice, trained through countless films to project both authority and warmth, filled the space. You know, I've played a lot of roles in my career, heroes mostly, men who fight for what's right. He gestured around the room at the sparkling displays. But true heroes aren't usually in the spotlight, they're in the shadows, doing the hard work that makes all this possible. He looked directly at Waverly now. When we celebrate these remarkable gems, we're not just celebrating nature's miracles or the craftspeople who shape them. We're celebrating everyone in the chain of human hands that brought them here. The curator shifted uncomfortably, aware that dozens of phones were capturing every word. So, Johnson continued, his gaze sweeping the gathered elite, before we admire what these stones are worth, perhaps we should remember what they cost, not in dollars, but in human lives and labor. The tech billionaire, Cartwright, stepped forward. I think what we need here is more than just words, he turned to Margaret. Would you show us? Would you place your hand on the display, right above where you once held the real thing? The security guards looked to Waverly, who hesitated only briefly before nodding his permission. This moment had already escaped his control. Better to embrace it than resist further. With a practiced smile, he moved to the display case and produced a small key from his pocket. Perhaps, he said, recovering his professional demeanor, we might do even better than that. He unlocked a hidden panel at the base of the display. With proper supervision, of course, we could allow Ms. Khumalo to hold the Emperor's tear once more. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. These gems were never handled outside secure environments with gloves and specialized tools. What Waverly was suggesting was unprecedented. Margaret's eyes widened. I couldn't possibly— You should, Johnson said quietly. You've earned that right, more than anyone else in this room. With theatrical precision, Waverly disabled the alarm system and carefully opened the case. Using a small velvet-lined tray, he lifted the diamond from its display stand. The massive teardrop-shaped gem caught the light from every angle, scattering rainbow reflections across Margaret's weathered face. "Our protocols usually require gloves," the curator explained, "but in this extraordinary circumstance." He held out the tray. With reverence, Margaret extended her hands, hands that had spent decades crushing rock, hands with missing fingertips and permanent calluses. When the diamond settled into her palm, a circle of hushed awe surrounded them. "It's so light now," she whispered. "They've taken so much away to make it shine." The truth of her observation hung in the air, a simple statement that carried layers of meaning beyond gemology. The uncut stone had been nearly twice this size before master jewelers had carved away everything they deemed imperfect. Margaret closed her eyes, cradling the gem that had passed from her life to another world entirely. "Sifo died 3 years after we found this," she said softly. A tunnel collapse. Johannes lost his leg the following year. Thabo's daughter is in university now, the first in their family. The diamond caught a tear that slipped down her cheek, magnifying it into a universe of refracted light. The following morning, headlines across social media told the story, "The Rock Stands Up for Diamond Miner at Elite Exhibition," and "Hollywood Star Humbles Luxury Crowd with Mining Workers' Tale." Videos of the encounter had gone viral overnight, with millions of views and thousands of comments. The exhibition, originally planned as an exclusive event for the ultra-wealthy, had unexpectedly become a conversation about labor, value, and human dignity. Margaret awoke in a luxury hotel suite, a gift from Cartwright, the tech billionaire who had insisted she stay as his guest rather than at the modest hostel she had booked. On the nightstand beside her was a small velvet box with a note, "A token of appreciation for your contribution to the exhibition. With respect, Gregory Waverly." Inside was a small crystal replica of the Emperor's tear, mounted on a simple silver chain. Not a diamond. Waverly wasn't authorized to give away gems worth millions, but a thoughtful acknowledgement nonetheless. The curator had recognized which way the winds of public opinion were blowing and made a strategic adjustment. Across town, Dwayne Johnson was on a morning talk show explaining what had compelled him to intervene. "It was simple," he told the host. "I saw someone being denied their truth, and I couldn't just stand by." By noon, the exhibition had been transformed. A hastily printed addendum to the program featured Margaret Khumalo as a special guest speaker, scheduled to give 3 talks about her experiences in the diamond mines. The line to enter stretched around the block, not just the usual wealthy collectors, but ordinary people drawn by the viral story, wanting to witness the unexpected collision of worlds. Gregory Waverly, ever adaptable, had rebranded the entire exhibition overnight. What had been marketed as treasures of the earth, nature's most precious creations, was now Hands That Shape Treasures, the Human Journey of Gemstones. Posters featuring Margaret's weathered hands alongside the polished gems had been rushed into production. Cartwright's technology company announced a new initiative, a scholarship fund for the children of mining communities, named in honor of Margaret and her former colleagues. The Brazilian supermodel posted a video removing her diamond earrings, explaining that she would be more selective about the jewelry she wore in the future, researching the sourcing and labor practices behind each piece. Johnson's own charity foundation pledged support to improve safety conditions in mines worldwide. His Instagram post, showing him with his arm around Margaret's shoulders, became his most liked photo of the year, accompanied by the caption, "The strongest people I've met rarely have titles or wealth. They have character and stories that matter. Real strength." 6 months later, Margaret stood at the entrance to the Kimberley mine, surrounded by a film crew. Beside her was Dwayne Johnson, dressed not in a tailored suit, but in sturdy work clothes, ready to descend into the mine himself for a documentary about the human cost of luxury goods. The Emperor's Tear diamond had been permanently modified in its exhibition display. Now, alongside the technical details of its weight and clarity, was a photograph of the original mining team, with Margaret's name and the names of her colleagues clearly listed. A small portion of all exhibition proceeds went directly to a healthcare fund for retired miners with work-related illnesses. "Did you ever imagine that holding that rough stone would change your life this way?" Johnson asked her as the cameras rolled. Margaret shook her head, smiling at the absurdity of it all. "That day in New York, I only wanted to see it again, to know that my work mattered. I never expected the whole world would see me." Johnson looked into the camera, his expression serious despite his trademark charisma. "Every object has a human story behind it. The true value of anything isn't in what we pay for it, but in understanding what it cost to create. In human effort, in sacrifice, in hope." Margaret nodded, pointing toward the mine entrance. "Shall we begin?" she asked. "There's much to see below." Together, celebrity and miner walked into the darkness, reversing the journey the diamond had taken decades before. Not from darkness into light, but from ignorance into understanding.